The lurch of the ship was the first thing that registered. A sudden, violent heave that sent my paperback novel skittering across the cabin floor. Not the gentle sway I'd grown accustomed to over 3 days on the Serenity of the seas. This was different, urgent. I blinked awake, the lingering haze of a dream, something about my old apartment, sunlight streaming through a clean window, evaporating in the sudden, jarring reality. My head throbbed, a dull ache behind my eyes. I'd probably had one too many margaritas at the deck party last night. A cruise, I'd told myself, was exactly what I needed, escape, a fresh start after everything. Another lurch. This one accompanied by a distant, high-pitched scream. Not a playful shriek from kids in the pool, but something ragged, animalistic, cut short by a wet, tearing sound. My heart gave a sudden, hard thump against my ribs. I sat up in the queen-sized bed, the plush comforter feeling suddenly heavy, suffocating. The cabin was dark, only the faint glow of the emergency path lights along the floor visible. The blackout curtains, drawn against the morning sun, offered no hint of dawn. Why was it still dark? My phone lay charging on the bedside table. 6:17 a.m. Too early for most things, definitely too early for screams like that. A banging started from the corridor outside, rapid and frantic, punctuated by desperate shouts. "Open up! For God's sake, open the door!" The voice was male, hoarse with panic. Then a sickening thud against what sounded like a cabin door nearby, followed by a grunt and a gasp. The shouts morphed into a guttural gurgle, like someone choking on their own tongue. Then silence. A horrible, stretched-out silence, broken only by the rhythmic creak of the ship's hull and the distant, insistent thrum of the engines, a constant, reassuring heartbeat that suddenly felt menacing. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a drunken brawl. The air in the cabin felt thick, heavy with an unspoken threat. Every nerve ending in my body hummed with a primal dread. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet landing silently on the cool carpeted floor. The silence outside was almost worse than the noise. I strained my ears, trying to decipher anything that would make sense of this. The rhythmic lapping of waves against the hull, normally a soothing lullaby, now sounded like a predator closing in. Then came the moaning. Low at first, a collective hum that seemed to vibrate through the very structure of the cruise ship. It wasn't a human moan of pain or grief. It was something deeper, emptier, reverberating with a hunger that chilled me to the bone. It came from all directions, from above and below, from the starboard side and the port. The ship itself seemed to be groaning in agony. This was wrong, all of it, terribly, horribly wrong. I tiptoed to the cabin door, pressing my ear against the cool metal. The moaning was louder here, more distinct. It sounded like dozens of voices, all making the same guttural, mindless sound. A wet scraping noise passed right outside my door, a dragging sound, followed by a soft, squelching thud. I pulled back, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might punch through my chest. My hands were shaking. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cabin's air conditioning. My gaze darted around the small space. My packed suitcase, half unpacked. The brochure for tomorrow's port of call, a cheerful picture of a sunny beach. The quaint painting of a lighthouse on the wall. All of it felt like relics from a bygone era, from a world that had ceased to exist in the last few minutes. I needed a weapon. Anything. The closest thing was a heavy ceramic ashtray from the desk. I grabbed it, its weight surprisingly comforting in my trembling hand. What was happening out there? Was it a terrorist attack? A gas leak? The word that flashed unbidden in my mind was too absurd, too fictional to consider. But the sounds, the moaning, the wet tearing, the sheer mindless aggression, it clawed at my sanity. I felt a surge of nausea. This was a nightmare, A waking, breathing nightmare unfolding on a cruise ship at sea, hundreds of miles from anything, anywhere. Trapped. The moaning swelled, a tide of guttural sounds washing down the corridor. A shadow flickered past the peephole, something tall, stooped, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. I pressed myself against the wall, as far from the door as possible, the ashtray held like a lifeline. My breathing was shallow, ragged. I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths, trying to control the panic that threatened to overwhelm me. Think, Hannah, think. I remembered the safety briefing on embarkation day. Emergency exits, muster stations, lifeboats. All useless if whatever was out there was this. My eyes fell on the balcony door, a sliding glass panel leading to my private slice of the ocean. It was a flimsy barrier, offering no real security, but it was another way out, a way to see. Slowly, carefully, I slid the heavy curtains open a sliver. The first thing I noticed was the sky. Not the clear, pre-dawn dark I expected, but an ominous, hazy orange. Smoke. Thick, acrid smoke billowed in the distance, staining the horizon. My stomach clenched. Something was burning. A lot of somethings. And then I saw the water. The beautiful, endless expanse of the Caribbean Sea, usually sparkling under the sun, was now a deep, unsettling gray. And in the distance, small, dark shapes bobbed erratically on the waves. Debris. Or something else. My blood ran cold. I pushed the curtain wider. The balcony was small, furnished with 2 chairs and a tiny table. The railing was cold to the touch. The salty air was thick with the scent of burning chemicals mixed with something else, something metallic and sweet, like stale blood. I peered over the railing. Below, on a lower deck, a horrific scene unfolded. It was a nightmare made real. Dozens of people, or what used to be people. They shuffled, stumbled, and clawed at each other, a grotesque tableau. Their clothes were torn, skin pale and mottled, eyes glazed over with a milky film. One of them, a woman in a floral sundress, was hunched over another body, tearing at the flesh with her teeth, a wet, tearing sound I'd heard just minutes before. A shriek tore from my throat, raw and involuntary. I slapped a hand over my mouth, stifling the sound, but it was too late. A head snapped up. One of them, a man, his face a ruin of blood and gore, his jaw hanging at an unnatural angle. His eyes, milky and dead, fixed on me. He let out a low, guttural growl, a sound of pure, unadulterated hunger. Then another head snapped up, and another. A dozen of them, all turning, all looking up at me, drawn by the sound of my scream. Their moans intensified, a chorus of the damned. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. My legs felt like lead. I stumbled back, fumbling with the balcony door. It slid open with a soft shh. I yanked it shut, the lock clicking into place with a flimsy snick. It wouldn't hold them, not if they truly wanted in. They were everywhere. The zombie invasion had come to the cruise ship. This wasn't some isolated incident. This was widespread, global even, if the smoke on the horizon was any indication. I gripped the ceramic ashtray, my knuckles white. Zombies. The word, once so comfortably nestled in the realm of fiction, was now a horrifying, tangible reality. And I was trapped on a floating city in the middle of the open ocean with them. The moaning from the corridor intensified again, closer this time, accompanied by scraping sounds. They were still out there. Maybe they were trying to get into my cabin. Maybe they were just wandering aimlessly. But their hunger, their relentless pursuit of the living, was undeniable. I had to get out, but where? The public announcement system crackled to life, a sudden, jarring burst of static. My heart leaped into my throat. Hope? An explanation? A rescue plan? Attention, passengers and crew, a voice began, strained and barely coherent. "This is your captain. We are experiencing an unprecedented situation. Please remain in your cabins. Do not, I repeat, do not open your doors. Emergency! Personnel are attempting to contain." The voice broke off abruptly, replaced by a garbled scream. Then silence. Just the static, like a white noise machine of dread. My blood ran cold. The captain, gone. If the bridge, the nerve center of the ship, was compromised, what hope did anyone have? The engines, that comforting thrum, continued. Was anyone even steering this Leviathan? Or were we just a massive, drifting tomb, a death trap on the high seas? The moaning from the corridor started up again, closer, more insistent. I heard a dull thump against my cabin door. They were here. I backed away, pressing myself against the wall opposite the door, the ceramic ashtray a laughable defense against whatever waited on the other side. My mind raced, grappling with the sheer impossibility of the situation. This was a horror movie, but it was my horror movie. My eyes scanned the cabin for an alternative. The bathroom, the closet. Neither offered an escape, just a different, temporary hiding spot. I was on deck 8, just a few decks below the main Lido deck. Could I get to the stairs? The elevators? Both seemed like suicide. The ship was a maze of identical corridors and public spaces, all potential hunting grounds. Another thump against the door, harder this time. The wood groaned faintly, a thin, reedy groan, almost like a whisper. They were testing it, learning, or just mindlessly pushing. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing I could disappear, willing this to be a dream. But the smell of burning plastic and stale blood, the distant moaning, the rhythmic sway of the ship, all asserted their brutal reality. I was on a cruise ship, and the world had ended, and I was next. A memory flashed, my father, years ago, telling me about naval architecture. "These ships are compartmentalized, Hannah," he'd said, his voice full of pride, "designed to withstand anything, fire, flooding, even a rogue wave." A rogue wave, I thought bitterly, not a rogue plague of the undead. But compartmentalization, that was a thought. Could I lock myself in something more secure than a flimsy cabin door? I looked at the heavy steel door to the connecting cabin, empty as far as I knew, locked from the inside. But if the infected could break through a standard cabin door, a steel one might offer a few more precious minutes. Or it might just be another trap. The thought of being trapped in a double cage was terrifying. The sound of splintering wood came from a few cabins down. A muffled shriek, then the wet tearing sound again. They were getting in. Cabin by cabin, deck by deck, the zombie invasion was consuming the serenity of the seas. I had to move, now. My phone. I snatched it from the charger, heart pounding. No service, not even a single bar. The Wi-Fi wasn't working. We were truly isolated, a forgotten speck on the vast, uncaring ocean. I slipped it into my pocket anyway, a useless but familiar comfort. I moved to the closet, rummaging quickly. A pair of sturdy jeans, a dark long-sleeved shirt. Not exactly tactical gear, but better than the flimsy sundress I was wearing. I pulled on my sneakers. Practicality over style, always. My backpack, a small day pack, lay on the shelf. I shoved a bottle of water, a few granola bars, and my phone inside. Basic supplies, better than nothing. The banging on my door intensified, a hollow, insistent thump, thump. The wood around the peephole began to splinter. I could hear a low growl right on the other side of the thin barrier. It was no longer just wandering. It was focused. It wanted in. It wanted me.
I had to get out. The balcony. It was a risk, a huge risk, but it was the only direction the monsters weren't coming from. I could try to climb to the next balcony or drop to the one below. It was a desperate gamble, but the alternative was certain death. I slid the balcony door open again, the salt-laced wind immediately whipping into the cabin, carrying the metallic scent of blood and the distant, constant moaning. The sea stretched out, an endless, indifferent canvas. I looked up. The next balcony was only a few feet above, the railing within reach if I really stretched. Below? A perilous drop to the lower decks, or worse, directly into the waves if I slipped. I chose up. Survival instinct. Always. I slung my backpack over one shoulder, grabbed the ashtray again, and stepped onto the small balcony. My hands were slick with sweat, but I gripped the railing tightly. The cruise ship swayed gently, a constant, subtle motion that now felt like a deliberate attempt to throw me off balance. I heard the splintering sound again, louder this time. The cabin door was giving way. I looked back, just as a pale, rotting hand punched through the peephole, grasping blindly at the empty air inside. A gasp of pure terror escaped my lips. No time. I jumped, scrambling for purchase on the railing above. My fingers found the cold, smooth metal, scraping against it, but I held on. My feet slipped on the wall, sending a shower of plaster dust and flakes of paint onto the balcony below. For a heart-stopping second I dangled, muscles screaming, the vast, unforgiving ocean a dizzying expanse beneath me. My body screamed in protest, but adrenaline coursed through me, lending me a desperate strength. With a final desperate heave, I pulled myself up, scrambling over the railing and landing awkwardly on the balcony above. My knee slammed against a chair, sending a jolt of pain through my leg, but I ignored it. I was out. For now.
I pressed myself against the wall, listening. My cabin door burst open with a crash, followed by guttural growls and the sound of heavy bodies shuffling inside. They were there. They had found my safe haven. My skin crawled. I had escaped by mere seconds. My new location was another standard cabin balcony. The sliding door was, thankfully, closed. I peered through the glass. The cabin was empty, thankfully, but the view wasn't much better. Below me, on the promenade deck, the scene was pure anarchy. Deck chairs overturned, tables shattered, blood smeared across the pristine white deck. And everywhere, those things. Shambling, tearing, feeding. A monstrous tableau against the backdrop of the sunrise, now fully visible, painting the smoky sky in hues of orange and violent red. I needed a plan, fast. Staying on this balcony was temporary. They would undoubtedly be drawn to the broken door below, but eventually they'd realize I was gone. Or another one would stumble onto this balcony. I had to get inside. This cabin. It was my only immediate option. I tried the sliding door. Locked, of course. Panic flared again. I was trapped on a balcony, 2 decks above a horde of the infected, with no way into the cabin. I looked around desperately. The glass, could I break it? The ceramic ashtray was still clutched in my hand. It was heavy, but was it heavy enough? I took a deep, shuddering breath. No choice. I aimed for the corner of the glass panel, the weakest point. I swung the ashtray, putting all my meager strength into it. The glass spiderwebbed, a sickening crack, but it didn't shatter. Damn it. Cruise ship glass was reinforced, thick, designed to withstand storms, not a panicked survivor. I hit it again, harder and again. My arm ached. The glass groaned, stressed, but held. This was useless. I was making too much noise. Any second, one of those things would hear me, look up, and be drawn to my position like moths to a flame. And then I heard it. Not from below, but from the cabin next door. A soft, scuffling sound. Then a cough. A human cough. My head snapped around. Another passenger? A survivor? I risked a glance at the adjoining balcony. It was occupied. A man, middle-aged, with a worried expression, was peering over his railing at the chaos below. He turned, looked at me, and his eyes widened in surprise and a flash of shared terror. "Hey," I hissed, keeping my voice low. "Can you hear me?" He nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, what in God's name is going on?" "Doesn't matter," I whispered, glancing nervously at the broken glass of my balcony door. "I'm trapped out here. The door's locked. Can you get me in?" He looked at my door, then at his. "I don't think so. These balconies are separate. No connecting doors." He was right.
Standard cruise ship layout. Separate balconies for privacy. "Is your cabin door unlocked?" I asked desperately. He nodded slowly. "I think so. I just came out here a few minutes ago. Heard the noise. Didn't lock it?" "Then I need to get to your balcony," I said, a desperate plan forming. It was risky, more risky than the first climb. This time, it wasn't just up, but sideways. He looked doubtful. "It's a gap. The railings are connected, but there's a good foot or so between the actual floors and the wall." I looked at the gap. It was narrow, but the outside of the ship was slick, painted steel. There was nothing to hold on to. A sheer drop. If I slipped, it was into the frigid ocean, a death just as certain as the infected. "I have to try. They're in my old cabin now." He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Okay, but be careful. If you fall..." He didn't need to finish. I took another deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. This was it. Another leap of faith. I gripped the railing of my balcony, looked at the adjacent one, and swung my leg over. My feet found purchase on the narrow ledge between the two balconies. My body pressed against the cold steel of the ship's hull. The wind was stronger here, trying to peel me off. The sound of the waves crashing against the ship's bow, normally a distant rumble, was now a loud, threatening roar. Inch by agonizing inch, I shuffled sideways. My fingers ached from the grip. My shoes slipped on the slick surface. I could feel the vibrations of the ship's engines through the steel, a low tremor that intensified my vertigo. The infected below were still distracted, but how long until one of them looked up? Just a few more feet. My shoulder brushed against the dividing wall. My hand reached out, finding the railing of his balcony. I pulled myself across, straddling the gap, then quickly swung my legs over, landing with a grateful sigh on the safety of his balcony. My whole body was trembling, muscles screaming. "You made it," he breathed, relief flooding his face. Unbelievable. "Thanks," I gasped, leaning against the railing, trying to catch my breath. "I'm Hannah." "Arthur," he said, extending a hand. His grip was surprisingly firm. "Come on, let's get inside." He slid open his balcony door, and we stepped into his cabin. It was a mirror image of mine, but a safe haven for now. The air inside felt stifling after the wind, but it was quiet. We moved to the main door. He checked the peephole. "Still clear for now," he whispered, "but the noise from down the hall, it's not good." "The captain announced something," I said, my voice still hoarse. Then it cut out. He sounded panicked. Arthur grimaced. "I heard that."
"Something about unprecedented situation. What does that even mean?" He looked at me, his eyes wide. "You saw them on the lower deck, didn't you? What are they?" "Zombies," I said, the word feeling foreign and unreal even as I spoke it. "That's what they look like. People who are infected. They want to bite, to eat." Arthur stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. "Zombies? Like in the movies? You're serious?" I nodded grimly. "I saw them, and I heard them. On my deck. They broke into a cabin." He ran a hand through his thinning gray hair, looking utterly lost. "My God, on a cruise ship? We're in the middle of the ocean. How could this happen?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but we have to assume it's everywhere. The smoke on the horizon, the captain's message, this isn't isolated." We were quiet for a moment, the enormity of the situation settling over us like a shroud. A zombie invasion on a cruise ship at sea. The premise of a B-movie, now our terrifying reality. "What do we do?" Arthur finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We can't stay here. These cabins, they're not secure. And the food, the water." "We need to find a safe zone," I said, thinking aloud. "Somewhere defensible. The bridge, maybe? Or the engine room? Command centers?" "The bridge is probably crawling with them if the captain's gone," Arthur countered, a grim realism in his voice. "And the engine room, that's deep in the belly of the ship. A maze. Could be a death trap. What about the lifeboats?" My gaze went to the sealed porthole in his cabin, imagining the long, perilous drop to the brightly colored lifeboats tethered to the side of the ship. Even if we got to them, and even if they worked, where would we go? We're in the middle of the ocean. We have no idea if there's land or if it's safe. "So we just float until we starve?" Arthur asked, a flicker of despair in his eyes. "No," I said, a spark of resolve igniting within me. "We fight. We survive. We find out what's going on. We find a way off this ship, or we make it safe." He looked at me, a stranger he'd just met, a woman who'd climbed across balconies to escape the undead. A faint, desperate hope entered his eyes. Okay, you're right. So, what's first?" "Supplies," I said, my mind already working, calculating. "We need more water, food, anything we can use as a weapon, and a map, a ship's map. The emergency plans usually have schematics. There might be one on the back of the cabin door or in the hallway." He nodded, looking around his cabin for anything useful. He pointed to a small metal lamp on his bedside table. "This is heavy. Could work." I glanced at my backpack. "I have an ashtray and a few granola bars, a bottle of water." "Not much," Arthur observed, but he didn't sound defeated. He sounded ready. The rhythmic thrum of the engines was our only constant, a reminder that this giant vessel was still alive, still moving, carrying us into an unknown future, or perhaps to our watery graves. This cruise ship was no longer a symbol of luxury and escape. It was a floating prison, a concrete manifestation of the apocalypse, a crucible where humanity would be tested to its limits. A low growl sounded from the corridor again, closer than before. My heart leaped. "They're still out there," I whispered, "and they're getting closer." Arthur moved to the door, peering through the peephole, his face drained of color. "Oh, God, Hannah, there are more, a lot more. They're coming down the hall. They're moving fast." Fast? That was a new variable. The ones I'd seen on the lower deck were slow, shambling. But if these were faster, our chances dwindled further. The very notion of surviving the zombie invasion on a cruise ship at sea was becoming more terrifying with every passing minute. "We need to barricade the door," I said, looking around the cabin. "Not much to work with. 2 small chairs, a desk, a luggage rack. Flimsy at best." We pushed the desk and chairs against the door, knowing it was futile, but needing to do something. The thumping against the door began. Not a hollow thump this time, but a heavy, solid thud, followed by a grating sound, like claws on wood. They were pushing, tearing. "Okay," Arthur said, his voice trembling but determined. "Okay, this buys us a few minutes. What's next? The map. Where would a map be?" I remembered the emergency evacuation diagram on the back of my old cabin door. "There should be one on this door," I said, pointing. Arthur turned, his eyes scanning the back of the door. "Found it," he exclaimed, tearing it off the wall. It was a basic schematic of our deck, showing the layout of the cabins, fire exits, and stairwells. "We're here," he pointed, "cabin 823. Stairwell is down this way, a few cabins past the elevators." "Elevators are a death trap," I said immediately. "Stairs, always stairs. They're our best bet for moving between decks without attracting too much attention." The door shuddered, a loud crack echoing in the small cabin. A thin splinter of wood flew inward, landing on the carpet. They were really working at it now.
We were running out of time. "We need to move," I said, grabbing the metal lamp from Arthur. "You ready?" He nodded, gripping his own lamp-turned weapon. His face was pale, but his jaw was set. "As I'll ever be. Where to?" "Stairwell," I said, "and then we figure it out. We need to go up."
"Get to the higher decks, maybe the bridge. See if we can get a broader view of the situation. Get off this deck." The door began to buckle. A panel near the handle split, revealing a sliver of darkness. A low, wet growl issued from the crack. This was it, the moment of truth. Either we pushed through or we died here, trapped in a luxurious cabin, devoured by the dead. The irony was almost unbearable. "On my count," I whispered, my heart hammering like a drum against my ribs. 3, 2, 1, go! I lunged for the door, Arthur right behind me. We shoved the barricade aside, the chairs scraping noisily across the floor. The door swung open with a shriek of tortured wood and metal. 3 of them stood in the corridor. 2 were the slow, shambling kind, dressed in bright resort wear, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of hunger. The third, however, was different. A crew member in a stained uniform, pale and gaunt, but moving with terrifying speed, its arms outstretched, fingers clawing. It lunged immediately. "Head!" I screamed, swinging the lamp with all my might. The metal connected with the crew member's temple with a sickening crunch. It stumbled, but didn't fall, its head lolling to one side. These were tougher than I expected. Arthur, with a guttural roar, swung his lamp at one of the slower ones, catching it in the chest. It didn't react, just kept coming. "The head," I repeated, desperation in my voice. I didn't have a gun, no axe, no machete, just a flimsy metal lamp. I pulled the lamp free, the crew member still swaying, and swung again, this time aiming precisely. The lamp connected with the top of its skull, splitting it open with a wet crack. The infected dropped, spasming on the carpeted floor, then went still. The other 2 were almost on us. Arthur roared again, swinging his lamp in a wide arc, catching one of them across the face. It staggered back, blood and bile spraying from its ruined jaw. The other, a woman in a bright yellow swimsuit, lunged at me. I ducked under its grasping arms, the metallic smell of its breath assaulting my nostrils. I swung the lamp upward, catching it under the chin. Its head snapped back, a sickening crack. It dropped like a stone, its limbs twitching. "Are you okay?" Arthur gasped, still breathing heavily, his lamp clutched tightly. "Yeah, that was close." My hands were shaking again, but this time the adrenaline-fueled tremor had a strange edge of exhilaration. I had killed. I had survived. The corridor was quiet again, save for the distant moaning. 3 bodies lay on the plush carpet, the white-gloved staff who cleaned these halls every day, now surely dead or worse. The silence was unnerving. Too quiet. "Stairwell," I pointed, grabbing Arthur's arm. "Now." We moved quickly, silently, our shoes making soft thuds on the carpet. The corridor was a chilling tableau of luxury and death. Cabin doors hung ajar, revealing overturned furniture, splashes of dark fluid. One door was completely ripped from its hinges, exposing the ravaged interior. The air was thick with the faint smell of decay, mingled with the lingering perfume of expensive toiletries. It was a sensory assault, a jarring clash between the world that was and the world that had become. We reached the stairwell. A heavy, fireproof door, red with a white sign. I tried the handle. Locked. "Damn it," I muttered. "Emergency exit protocols," Arthur said, trying the handle too. "These are usually locked from the outside for security, but free from the inside." He pointed to a small red button next to the door. "This should unlock it, for emergencies." I pressed it. A soft click echoed from within the door mechanism. "Okay," I said, pushing the door open slowly. The stairwell was brightly lit, a stark contrast to the dim corridor. Polished steel railings, non-slip treads, and empty. A moment of relief washed over me, quickly replaced by a fresh wave of dread. Empty stairwells meant easy passage for us, but also for them. It was a funnel. Up, I said, pointing. Let's try for the upper decks. Fewer cabins, more open space, easier to spot trouble. And if we can get to the top, maybe we can see what's happening to the rest of the cruise ship. We started to ascend, our footsteps echoing in the quiet space. Every creak of the ship, every distant moan, sent a jolt of fear through me. The hum of the engines was louder here, a vibrating bass note that underscored the ship's continued, aimless journey across the sea. Deck 9, Deck 10. The stairwell was deserted. We passed the doors for each deck, listening intently. Nothing, just the unsettling silence. The higher we went, the more the natural light from the sky cut through the emergency lighting, casting long, eerie shadows. We reached Deck 11, the observation deck. Lounges, bars, the spa. Usually bustling with early risers, now deserted. The door to this deck was also unlocked. We pushed it open cautiously. The air here was different, less stuffy, fresher. Large windows offered panoramic views of the ocean. But the sight that greeted us was worse than anything I'd imagined. The observation lounge, a spacious area with plush seating, was a scene of carnage. Bodies lay slumped in chairs, some still, others twitching with unnatural movements. One of them, a man in a tuxedo, was repeatedly slamming his head against the glass, leaving a sickening smear of blood. His movements were frantic, desperate, as if he sensed the vastness of the ocean outside and wanted to break free.
"Oh, God," Arthur whispered, horrified. "More of them. Dozens." They shuffled aimlessly or gathered in small knots, drawn to the flickering television screens that still displayed the ship's promotional videos. Smiling families, pristine pools, lavish buffets, a cruel mockery of the reality. We ducked back into the stairwell, pulling the door shut silently. "Too many," I whispered, my voice shaking. "We can't go through there." "So, what now?" Arthur asked, despair creeping into his voice. "We're trapped in the stairwell. We can't go up without going through them. We can't go down without risking more of them." My eyes scanned the stairwell again. Below Deck 11, the doors to the various public decks and cabins. Above Deck 11, the crew-only access to the bridge. Another heavy steel door, marked Authorized Personnel Only. This one had a keypad. "The bridge," I said, pointing. "That's it. It's our only chance. There might be communications equipment up there, a way to send a distress signal, a way to control the ship. Someone has to be able to navigate us to land." Arthur looked doubtful. "A keypad? We don't have the code. And if there are crew up there, they're probably already—" He didn't finish the thought. "But it's fortified," I argued, "stronger than a normal door. If we can get in, it might be a stronghold. And if there's anybody alive up there, they'd be able to help." It was a desperate hope, a gamble, but it was the only one that made sense. We couldn't stay in the stairwell indefinitely. "Okay," Arthur sighed, running a hand over his face. "Okay, the bridge it is. But how do we get past the keypad?" I walked up to the heavy door, examining the keypad. It was a standard numeric pad, worn smooth from countless presses. "If it's locked down, there might be an override," I muttered, more to myself than to Arthur. "Or a way to bypass it. What about an emergency button? Fire alarm?" Arthur looked at the small fire alarm pull station on the wall next to the door. "You want to pull the fire alarm? That'll draw them all." "No," I shook my head. "Not if it's dead. If the ship's communications are down, the alarms might not work. But sometimes these systems are linked. Pressing it might reset the door or activate some other emergency protocol." It was a long shot, but we were out of options. "Worth a try," Arthur conceded. "But be ready. If it works and an alarm does sound." I nodded grimly. "We're in deep trouble. But if it doesn't work, we're still stuck. And if it does work, we might have a chance." I took a deep breath and pulled the fire alarm. A click, a faint whirring sound from within the alarm box. But no blaring siren, no flashing lights. The ship's internal systems were indeed dead,
or at least severely compromised.
A grim satisfaction settled over me. At least we hadn't attracted an entire horde. But the keypad remained dark. The door remained locked. My heart sank. Another dead end. "Hold on," Arthur said, his eyes fixed on the keypad. "Look, there's a small light, a power light. It's flickering. That means it has power. Maybe it just needs a reboot." I looked closer. He was right. A tiny, almost imperceptible red light pulsed erratically. How do we reboot a keypad? Sometimes, if you hold down a specific key, like the star or pound key, it forces a reset, he suggested. Or, if it's a security system, sometimes there's a master key sequence, like 911 for emergencies, or a sequence related to the ship's name. I tried holding down the star key. Nothing. Then the pound key. Still nothing. My mind raced. What would a ship's crew use? Something simple, memorable. The Serenity of the Seas. Could it be related to that? Serenity, I whispered. How many letters? 8, not numbers. Maybe something like the year the ship was built, Arthur suggested, or a common maritime code. We tried a few combinations. 1492, 1776, 2005, the year the ship was christened. I'd seen it on a plaque. All failed. The keypad remained stubbornly dark, the red light still flickering like a dying ember. Frustration flared. We were so close, just one door away from what might be our last hope. The hum of the engines, the constant swaying of the ship, felt like it was mocking us. We were drifting, aimless, just like our survival chances. Then Arthur noticed something. A small, almost invisible panel on the side of the doorframe, right next to the keypad. "What's this?" he asked, prying at it with the tip of his lamp. It popped open with a soft click, revealing a nest of wires and a small red button labeled Emergency Override. "Bingo!" I breathed. My heart leaped with renewed hope. "Do we just press it?" Arthur asked, uncertainty in his voice. "What else?" I said. "This is a zombie invasion on a cruise ship at sea. Just pressing it seems like a reasonable course of action." I reached in and pressed the button. A much louder click-whir echoed through the stairwell. The door to the bridge shuddered, and then, with a heavy thunk, the deadbolt retracted. The keypad lit up, displaying a cheerful "Welcome aboard" message, completely oblivious to the hell that had erupted on the decks below. "We're in," Arthur said, his voice filled with a mix of relief and trepidation. I pushed the heavy door open cautiously. The bridge was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of console screens and the gray light filtering in from the vast windows overlooking the ocean. The air was still, silent. No sounds of struggle, no moaning. Just the soft whir of electronics and the distant, rhythmic clang of the ship's massive anchor chain, a ghostly sound from the ship's depths. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the cavernous space. No answer. We stepped onto the bridge, weapons at the ready. The panoramic windows offered a breathtaking, terrifying view. The open ocean stretched out endlessly, a deep, menacing blue. And on the horizon, the same angry orange glow of burning cities. We truly were alone, an island of the living dead adrift. The bridge itself was a tangle of sophisticated equipment. Control panels, radar screens, navigation charts. Everything a modern cruise ship needed to operate, but it was deserted. No captain, no first officer, no helmsman. Just rows of empty seats, a chilling testament to how quickly the zombie invasion had spread. "Looks like nobody made it," Arthur said, his voice quiet. My gaze fell on a slumped figure in the captain's chair. A man in a pristine white uniform, his head resting on the console, a dark, viscous pool spreading around him. Not blood, but a strange, oily black fluid, similar to what I'd seen leaking from Lou in the style example. He was still, not moving. "Is he—" Arthur began. I approached cautiously. The man's skin was ashen, his eyes open and staring blankly at the ceiling. Not milky like the infected, but glazed with a profound, lifeless emptiness.
He had a small, neat hole in his temple. A pistol lay on the floor beside his hand. Suicide. He had chosen escape. The ultimate escape from surviving the zombie invasion on a cruise ship at sea. He chose not to turn, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He knew what was coming. A wave of profound sadness washed over me. This man, the captain, responsible for hundreds of lives, had been forced to make the ultimate choice. Arthur sagged against a console, his shoulders slumping. So we're really alone. No one to steer the ship, no one to call for help. I moved to the main communications console. A bank of radio equipment, satellite phones, all dark, dead. I tried flipping switches, pushing buttons. Nothing. The entire system was offline. Either the power was out to this specific equipment or the whole grid was down. No power, I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. No communications. This ship is a ghost. We're just drifting. Can't we start it? Arthur asked, gesturing vaguely at the array of controls. I mean, turn it around? Head for land? I shook my head. I don't even know how to begin. I'm not a sailor. Are you? He laughed, a short, humorless sound. I'm an accountant, Hannah. The closest I get to steering a ship is navigating a spreadsheet. Another dead end.
The bridge, our supposed sanctuary, was just another empty room, a monument to our helplessness. The zombie invasion had not only claimed the living, but the very infrastructure of the world. My eyes scanned the bridge, looking for anything useful. Navigation charts. Maybe we could at least figure out where we were. I found a large rolled-up chart on a table. I unrolled it. It showed the Caribbean Sea, marked with our last known position, a tiny red X hundreds of miles from any major landmass. And we were still moving. The ship was still going somewhere, propelled by its massive engines, a monstrous autopilot. We're heading south-southeast, I read from the chart, pointing to the plotted course, towards nothing, just more open ocean. So we can't steer it. We can't call for help. What's the point of being up here then? Arthur asked, his voice thick with despair. Visibility, I said, looking out the panoramic windows. We can see. And maybe there's a smaller vessel out there, a fishing boat, anything. The vastness of the ocean was both daunting and strangely calming. It was a blank canvas, a fresh start, if we could just find a way to navigate it. My gaze drifted from the distant, burning horizon to the ship's immediate surroundings. The upper decks, visible below us. The swimming pools, now a dark, still blue. The Lido deck, where I'd seen the initial carnage. And beyond, the vast, empty expanse of the sea. Then I saw it, a dark shape bobbing in the water far off the port bow. Not debris, it was too regular, too large, and moving. Arthur, I said, pointing, look. He followed my gaze, his eyes widened. What is that? A ship? It was indeed a ship, a large one, another cruise ship. Its hull was dark, listing slightly, smoke trailing from its funnels. And as it drew closer, I could see them. Even from this distance, their numbers were clear, swarms of them on its decks, like ants on a carcass. A ghost ship, a floating mausoleum. My heart sank. Another one. And it was heading in our direction. Or, more accurately, we were heading towards it. Two derelict vessels, filled with the dead, on a collision course in the middle of the zombie-infested ocean. We need to get out of here, Arthur said, his voice strained. We need to get off this bridge. What if it's steering for us? What if they're trying to board? They can't steer, I countered, though a cold dread was creeping up my spine. And if their engines are damaged, they're drifting too. This is just terrible luck. But what if it wasn't? What if it was their captain turning the ship in a final act of malice or madness? Or what if it was just the currents drawing two massive metal coffins together? In the middle of the zombie-infested ocean. We need to get out of here, Arthur said, his voice strained.
We need to get off this bridge. What if it's steering for us? What if they're trying to board? They can't steer, I countered, though a cold dread was creeping up my spine. And if their engines are damaged, they're drifting too. This is just terrible luck. But what if it wasn't? What if it was their captain, turning the ship in a final act of malice or madness? Or what if it was just the currents drawing two massive metal coffins together?
The thought of two cruise ships, both infested with the undead, colliding in the middle of the sea sent a shiver down my spine. The screams, the chaos, the new opportunities for the dead to find fresh meat. It was a scenario straight out of a horror film. We watched in stunned silence as the other ship slowly drew closer. Its name, in faded letters, became visible. The Ocean's Dream. A cruel joke. "Can we warn them?" Arthur asked, gesturing at the dead communications equipment. I shook my head, my jaw tight. No power, no comms. We're blind and deaf out here. The captain's body still slumped in his chair, a silent reproach. He had known. He had chosen his exit. We were left to endure the slow, inevitable approach of another nightmare. The zombie invasion was everywhere, even in the vast, empty expanse of the sea. This was our new world, and it was utterly terrifying. The Ocean's Dream was close now, close enough to see the individual figures shuffling on its decks, their moans carrying faintly across the water, a chilling, collective lament. My stomach lurched. The sheer number of them was overwhelming. And our ship was still heading right for it, a magnetic attraction of the damned. "Impact," I whispered, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "We need to brace for impact." Arthur looked around the bridge, his eyes wide with panic. "Brace? Where? There's nothing to hold on to." The hum of our own ship's engines, a constant companion, now felt like the heartbeat of a beast dragging us to our doom. The ocean, usually so vast and liberating, had become an inescapable trap. We were at sea, hundreds of miles from help, facing a collision with another vessel of the dead. This was beyond anything I had ever imagined. I scrambled to the helmsman's station, gripping the heavy wooden wheel. It was useless, inert, but it gave me something solid to hold on to. Arthur braced himself against a console, his face pale. The two titans of the sea groaned as they finally touched, a low grinding sound that reverberated through our ship, rattling every plate and pipe. It wasn't a head-on collision, but a glancing blow, the two hulls scraping against each other with a terrifying shriek of tortured metal. The ship lurched violently, throwing us against the consoles. Alarms, which had been silent until now, suddenly blared to life, a cacophony of screeches, sirens, and flashing red lights. The impact must have jostled something, kick-starting the emergency systems. "This is it," Arthur yelled over the din, struggling to regain his footing. The side of the Serenity of the Seas scraped against the Ocean's Dream with an ear-splitting tear, like a giant fingernail dragging across a blackboard. The ship lurched violently, throwing us against the consoles. Alarms, which had been silent until now, suddenly bled to life, a cacophony of screeching sirens and flashing red lights. The impact must have jostled something, kick-starting the emergency systems. "This is it," Arthur yelled over the din, struggling to regain his footing. The side of the Serenity of the Seas scraped against the Ocean's Dream with an ear-splitting tear, like a giant fingernail dragging across a blackboard. The grinding metal filled the air, thick with the smell of ozone and burning paint. For a moment, it felt like the entire ship was going to rip itself apart. Then, with a final, shuddering crack, the two vessels separated, pulled apart by the momentum and the waves. Our ship, though damaged, was still afloat, still moving. The Ocean's Dream, however, was listing more severely, its smoke plume thicker, darker. And through the new, jagged tear in our hull, I could see them. The infected pouring from the Ocean's Dream onto our decks like a parasitic infestation. "They're boarding!" Arthur screamed, pointing a trembling finger. The collision had created a temporary bridge of twisted metal and debris between the two ships, and the creatures, drawn by the sound of the alarms, by the sheer proximity of fresh prey, were using it. They shambled across, a grotesque procession, their moans now amplified by the blaring sirens, a symphony of hell. My heart sank. This was worse than a collision. It was an invasion, a literal zombie invasion by sea. The alarms continued to blare, a constant grating sound that clawed at my sanity. The ship, once a symbol of serene escape, was now a battleground. I had thought the bridge was a safe haven. I was wrong. The zombie invasion on a cruise ship at sea was just beginning, and we were now on the front line. "We need to get out of here," I yelled, pulling Arthur towards the heavy steel door. "Now! They'll be drawn to the alarms. They'll be coming for the bridge." We scrambled back into the stairwell, the blaring sirens deafening. The red emergency lights flashed, painting the stairwell in a horrifying strobe. Every shadow seemed to twist into a ghastly figure. The sounds of the infected, their guttural moans, were now mixed with the ship's groaning, the metallic shrieks of damaged bulkheads. "Which way?" Arthur gasped, pointing up and down. "Down!" I shouted, adrenaline flooding my system. "Away from the breach, away from the alarms. We need to find somewhere quiet, somewhere out of the main thoroughfare." We plunged down the stairwell, our feet pounding on the metal treads. Deck 10, Deck 9, Deck 8. The higher decks, I reasoned, would be the primary targets of the boarding infected. We needed to go deep, into the belly of the beast. As we descended, the blaring alarms grew fainter, though still a piercing echo in our minds. The moaning, however, grew louder, more present. This part of the ship, which we had passed through silently minutes ago, was now alive with their presence. The lower decks. We reached Deck 5, the main promenade deck with shops and restaurants. The fire door to this deck was ajar, the heavy metal scraping against the floor. A low growl emanated from within. "No," I whispered, pulling Arthur back. "Not that way." "Where then?" Arthur pleaded, his voice cracking with fear. "Everywhere is full of them." My eyes darted around. The map, still clutched in Arthur's hand, became a lifeline. I snatched it, my finger tracing the maze-like corridors. Crew quarters, utility rooms, maintenance access. Areas less traveled by passengers, more obscure, more defensible. Deck 2, I pointed, storage, laundry, staff areas. Maybe we can find a way to the engine room from there, somewhere deep, secure, out of the way. It was a long shot. The engine room would be hot, loud, and potentially a trap. But it was also the heart of the ship, heavily reinforced and crucial for survival. If we could get there, maybe we could control the ship, or at least survive its uncontrolled journey across the sea. "It's a long way down," Arthur said, doubt in his voice. "It's our only way," I replied, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "We need to get out of these stairwells. They're a funnel. If we encounter a horde here, we're done." We continued our descent, the metal lamps clutched tightly. Each deck was a gamble, each fire door a potential barrier or a hidden danger. The air grew heavier, cooler, smelling faintly of salt and diesel, a stark contrast to the perfumed upper decks. We passed the doors to the various public spaces, the casino, the grand dining hall, the theater, all silent, dead, or worse. We reached Deck 2. The air was thick with the smell of chemicals, disinfectant, and something else, something metallic and stale. This was the working part of the ship, the engine room's antechamber. The fire door to Deck 2 was slightly ajar, just enough to reveal a glimpse of the corridor behind. Dark, And quiet. Too quiet. "Be careful," I whispered, pushing the door open slowly. The corridor was narrow, functional, stripped of the luxury of the passenger decks. Exposed pipes, wires, industrial lighting. The carpet was replaced by linoleum, and no windows. Just sterile, enclosed space. We crept forward, our footsteps echoing unnervingly. The silence was broken only by the distant, rhythmic hum of the engines, a deep, resonating thrum that vibrated through the floor. It was a comforting sound in its constancy, but also a terrifying reminder that we were still moving, still adrift, on a cruise ship at sea, heading to an unknown fate. Then, a sound, a faint scraping from around a corner ahead. My blood ran cold. "Stop," I whispered, gripping Arthur's arm. We pressed ourselves against the wall, listening intently. The scraping sound grew louder, accompanied by a low, guttural moan. It was them, and they were close. "Laundry room," Arthur whispered, pointing to a door just ahead. "See it on the map? It's a large space."
Maybe we can barricade it. No, I shook my head. Too open, too many exits, entrances. We need somewhere smaller, more defensible. What about a locker room, a utility closet? My eyes scanned the map, frantically looking for a sanctuary in this labyrinth. Then I saw it, marked simply as Engine Access Tunnel. A narrow passage leading directly to the engine room, distinct from the main crew corridors. It was a risk, a deep dive into the guts of the ship, but it felt right, hidden, isolated. "Engine Access Tunnel," I pointed, my voice a whisper. "That's our way in. It's just past the laundry room." The scraping and moaning were getting closer. They were definitely coming our way. We had to move. We moved silently, carefully, towards the laundry room door. The sounds were coming from just beyond it, a sharp corner. We would have to pass it to reach the engine access tunnel. "When I say go," I whispered, "we run. Don't look back. Don't stop. Get to that tunnel." Arthur nodded, his face grim. His knuckles were white around the lamp. The moaning was right there now, just around the corner. I could hear the wet, dragging sound of their feet on the linoleum. The metallic smell of their breath was almost palpable. "Go!" I yelled, and we burst forward, sprinting past the laundry room door, my heart pounding in my ears. As we rounded the corner, I caught a glimpse of them. 5 figures, shambling down the corridor, crew members by their uniforms. One was missing an arm, dragging it uselessly behind him. Another had its jaw hanging loose, almost detached. Their eyes were empty, dead, focused on nothing but us. They saw us. Their moans intensified, a chorus of hungry cries. They picked up speed, a terrifying, unnatural sprint. "Faster!" Arthur yelled, pushing past me. We ran, our footsteps echoing loudly in the narrow corridor. The engine access tunnel was just ahead, another heavy steel door. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but the fear of being caught, of becoming one of them, fueled my every step. We reached the door. It was heavy, industrial, with a strong metal bar handle. I fumbled for it, my hands slick with sweat. "It's locked!" Arthur cried, pulling at it desperately. My heart sank. Another locked door, another dead end. The sounds of the infected were right behind us now, their growls almost in my ears. Then I saw it. A small, familiar red button next to the door. "Emergency override!" I yelled, recognizing the same mechanism from the bridge door. I slammed my hand against it. A loud click, whir echoed, the deadbolt retracting with a heavy thunk. "Get in!" I screamed, pulling the door open. We dove inside, slamming the heavy steel door shut behind us. I fumbled for the locking mechanism, a heavy, rotating wheel that sealed the door like a submarine hatch. I spun it, feeling a satisfying clunk as the door locked into place. The sounds of the infected slamming against the other side of the door were immediate and frantic. Growls, moans, heavy thuds. They were right there, but the door held. We leaned against it, breathing heavily, our bodies shaking.
The air in the tunnel was thick with the smell of hot oil, diesel, and machinery. It was loud, the roar of the massive engines now directly audible, a thunderous symphony of power that vibrated through the very deck beneath our feet. "We made it!" Arthur gasped, leaning his head against the cool steel. "For now," I replied, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving me weak and trembling. "We made it for now." The engine access tunnel was dark, lit only by emergency lights along the floor and the faint glow of distant machinery. It was narrow, claustrophobic, but safe, for the moment. "Where does this go?" Arthur asked, gesturing into the darkness. "The engine room," I said, a strange mix of dread and anticipation in my voice. "The heart of the cruise ship. Let's hope it's not a graveyard." The constant roar of the engines, the deep, powerful thrum that enveloped us, was a visceral reminder of our predicament. We were on a massive, drifting metal behemoth, a luxury liner turned prison, lost on the zombie-infested seas. We had bought ourselves time, but time was a finite resource on this floating tomb. We had to find a way to control this ship or find a way off it. This was no longer just about surviving the zombie invasion, it was about surviving the ship itself. We moved cautiously through the narrow tunnel, our lamps casting long, dancing shadows. The roar of the engines grew louder with every step, a primal, overwhelming force. The air was hot and humid, smelling of fuel and sweat. Pipes snaked along the walls, dripping condensation, making the floor slick in places. This was the raw, unglamorous underbelly of the Serenity of the seas, far from the pristine decks and luxurious cabins. We reached a heavy, pressure-sealed door, a circular hatch like something from a submarine. This had to be it, the entrance to the engine room. My heart pounded against my ribs, a dull counterpoint to the thunderous roar. "Ready?" I asked Arthur, my voice barely audible over the din. He nodded, his face grim. He pulled out the map again, pointing. "According to this, the main control station is just past here, and there are emergency escape ladders to the upper decks from the catwalks." Escape ladders, a glimmer of hope. But first, the engine room. We spun the locking wheel on the hatch.
It groaned, a deep metallic protest, then slowly, reluctantly, opened with a hiss of escaping air pressure. The engine room was immense, a cathedral of steel and machinery, bathed in the red glow of emergency lights. Massive engines, turbines, pipes, and pumps stretched as far as the eye could see, a dizzying array of interconnected components. The heat was oppressive, immediately making my clothes cling to my skin. The roar was deafening, a physical assault on my ears, making conversation impossible. Catwalks crisscrossed the space high above, looking down on the pulsating heart of the ship. We stood on a metal-grated floor, the vibrations of the engines reverberating through our very bones. And scattered among the machinery, among the giant pistons and spinning flywheels, were more of them, the infected. They moved with a strange, jerky rhythm, dictated by the vibrating floor and the sheer power of the machinery. Their moans were swallowed by the engine roar, replaced by a low, constant guttural hum that was more felt than heard. Many of them were crew members, their stained uniforms clinging to rotten flesh. Some were fused to the machinery, trapped in gears or between pipes, their bodies twisted into grotesque forms, still twitching, still reaching. My stomach churned. This was a nightmare of metallic proportions, a vision of hell. "Control station!" Arthur yelled, pointing towards a glass-enclosed booth elevated above the main floor. It looked like a command center, a safe zone within the roaring chaos. We started moving, navigating a treacherous path around massive components, stepping over discarded tools and pools of oily water. The heat was suffocating. Every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking threat. The sound of the engines was so loud, I felt like my eardrums would burst. Suddenly, one of them, a gaunt figure in an engineer's jumpsuit, lunged from behind a stack of enormous pipes. It was fast,
propelled by the raw, mindless hunger. I swung my lamp, connecting with its head with a sickening thud. The lamp bent, the metal buckling, but it hit its mark. The infected stumbled, but didn't fall. Its eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed on me. "Hannah, watch out!" Arthur yelled, but his voice was swallowed by the roar. I saw another one, then two more, emerging from the labyrinth of machinery. They were drawn to the movement, to the living. The engine room, far from being a sanctuary, was a death trap. The sheer noise here meant they wouldn't hear us until we were right on top of them, and we wouldn't hear them until it was too late. I knew I couldn't rely on the damaged lamp anymore. I needed something else. My eyes darted around, searching. A heavy wrench lay on a workbench nearby. I scrambled for it, my fingers closing around the cold, oily metal. Much better. The first infected, the one I'd hit, was almost on me. I swung the wrench, putting all my strength into it. The heavy tool connected with its skull with a wet crack. This time it dropped, its head a pulpy mess. Effective, brutal, necessary. The other two were almost upon Arthur. He was swinging his lamp wildly, trying to keep them at bay, but they were closing in. I ran to his aid, the wrench feeling like an extension of my arm. I swung again, catching one of them in the side of the head. It staggered, then went down, convulsing violently. The third turned its attention to me. Its face was a mess of torn flesh and gristle, its jaw unhinged. It lunged, its teeth snapping at my arm. I brought the wrench up, blocking its attack, feeling its powerful jaws clamp down on the metal. The sheer force of its bite was shocking. I pushed back, gritting my teeth, the hot, stinking breath of the creature washing over me. I twisted the wrench, forcing its jaw open, and then brought the heavy tool down again, straight into the ruined skull. It dropped, twitching, then went still. "You okay?" I yelled, my voice hoarse. Arthur nodded, breathing heavily. His lamp was bent, almost useless. "Yeah, that was too close." "We need to get to that control station," I pointed, already moving. "It's glass enclosed. It might be safe." We pushed on, weaving through the thunderous heart of the cruise ship. Each step was a gamble, each shadow a potential hiding place for another monster. The heat was stifling, sweat pouring down my face, stinging my eyes. The metallic tang of blood mingled with the industrial smells, a potent cocktail of dread. We finally reached the base of the control station. A metal ladder led up to the enclosed booth. I scrambled up first, heart pounding. The glass walls offered a clear view of the engine room. And the door. It was heavy, steel, with a push-bar handle. I shoved it open. The air inside was blessedly cooler, quieter. The thick glass dampened the roar of the engines to a tolerable hum. The station was deserted, but the consoles were lit, displaying a dizzying array of data. Engine RPMs, fuel levels, GPS coordinates. "It's working," Arthur yelled, climbing in behind me. "The power's on here, and the navigation." I rushed to the main console, my eyes scanning the screens. The ship was still heading south-southeast, still drifting. But the systems were alive. There was a chance, a desperate, fragile chance. "We can steer it," I exclaimed, hope surging through me. "We can change course. We can find land." Arthur was already looking at a bank of controls, his face alight with a desperate optimism. "How? How do we even begin?" My eyes fell on a thick, leather-bound manual lying open on a nearby desk. Engine Room Operations Manual. My heart leaped. This is it. This is our Bible. I grabbed the manual, my fingers shaking. It was dense, technical, filled with diagrams and arcane instructions. But it was hope. The first real hope we'd had since this nightmare began. We might be able to survive this zombie invasion on a cruise ship at sea. We might actually have a chance to get off this floating tomb. The engine room, once a terrifying labyrinth of death, now held the key to our survival. But as I looked out through the glass, at the pulsating, throbbing heart of the ship, at the shuffling figures moving silently through the thunderous noise, I knew this was just the beginning. The engine room might be safe, but the ship itself was still a world of nightmares. And we were still hundreds of miles from anywhere. The distant, burning horizon, visible on the navigation screen, served as a stark reminder. The world outside was gone. We were alone. A tiny speck of humanity, adrift on a dead ocean. But we were alive. And as long as we had a chance, we would fight. This was surviving the zombie invasion on a cruise ship at sea. And it was far from over. This was the start of a long, terrifying journey. And the answers to all the questions still lay ahead, hidden in the depths of the ocean and the depths of this immense vessel. What would we find? What would we become? The sea, vast and indifferent, held its secrets close. We could only push on, one terrifying minute at a time.